I remember the moment as if it had been carved into my skin. The dryer was humming in the corner, the warm scent of fabric softener floating through the small laundry room. My hands were busy folding a stack of towels, soft and damp with steam still rising. It was so ordinary, so routine, until a sliver of sound slipped through the cracked door and shattered everything I thought I knew. I heard my son's voice, low and heavy, drifting from the kitchen. Jason, my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father passed away. The man I thought still carried a piece of the love I had poured into him all these years. His words cut through the hum of the dryer like glass against skin. He said the greatest gift for Christmas would be if I were gone. Not gone on a trip, not gone for a visit, gone as in dead. At first, I thought I had misheard. The towel in my hands suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds, pulling me down into the cold tile beneath my feet. My chest tightened, and I waited for the sound of laughter, the playful tone that would tell me it was a cruel joke. But what followed was worse, an easy, almost casual response from Emily, his wife, as if my absence, my death, was not shocking at all, but something that could be calmly agreed upon. I froze in place, listening to the silence that came after. That silence spoke louder than their words. It was the silence of people who meant what they had said. I pressed my palm against the washer, its vibrations buzzing through my skin, trying to keep myself steady. My knees wanted to give way, my heart wanted to scream, but all I could do was stand there, stunned. I thought of the 3 little ones sleeping upstairs, my grandchildren, the only bright sparks in this house. They still ran into my arms with laughter, still asked me for bedtime stories. They were the only reason I endured the sharp edges of Emily's tone, the only reason I stayed even when I felt invisible. But in that moment, standing alone in the haze of steam and betrayal, I realized I was not just unseen, I was unwanted. I gathered the towels with trembling hands and made my way upstairs to the small room they called Generous, the in-law suite where I had been allowed to stay, but never to truly live. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I let the words echo inside me again and again, burning their way deeper each time. And that was when the first thread of a thought began to unravel. How did I come to this point, where my own son wished me gone? The answer, I knew, would be found in the sacrifices I had made for him. Sacrifices that, looking back, may not have been love at all, but slow erasures of myself. When I think back on the years that brought me here, I see a trail of choices that I once called love, but now wonder if they were something else. Sacrifice has a way of disguising itself as devotion, until one day you look around and realize you have given away almost everything you had. After my husband passed, I told myself that Jason was all I had left, and that his happiness was my mission. So when he and Emily dreamed of a bigger home, I let go of the house Richard and I built together. That home was more than wood and brick. It was birthdays in the backyard, the smell of apple pie cooling on the windowsill, Richard's laugh echoing down the hallway. Still, I signed the papers, handed Jason and Emily $12,000, and told myself it was an investment in their future. I whispered that love was worth the loss, even as I packed my life into boxes and left behind the rooms that held my marriage. There were other sacrifices, too. A cruise I had saved for canceled without a second thought when Jason lost his job. I told him the money would tide him over until he was steady again. My suitcase, tagged for that trip, has been sitting in the back of my closet ever since, untouched. Every time I see it, I feel the weight of places I never went, experiences I traded for someone else's security. That suitcase became a quiet monument to the life I had put on hold. Day by day, I folded myself into the background of their lives. I became the babysitter when Emily needed me time, the extra pair of hands carrying in groceries, the quiet presence who slipped cash toward the bills when they were a little short. I filled their pantry, stocked their fridge, and rocked my grandchildren to sleep when the nights grew long. The children never knew those small acts were lifelines, not just conveniences. To them, I was simply grandma warm arms, bedtime stories, the smell of cookies in the oven, and I loved them for it. They were my light. But love without gratitude drains the giver in ways that are hard to measure. At the time, I convinced myself that it was enough to give, even if thanks never came. I told myself that being needed was close enough to being wanted, that providing was close enough to being loved. And yet, as I sat in that in-law suite, the words I overheard still fresh and cruel. I began to wonder, had I mistaken dependence for love? Had I poured myself out until there was nothing left, only to realize they had seen me as a wallet, a babysitter, an obstacle, anything but family? The thought lingered like a shadow, growing darker each time I let it in. That suitcase in the closet, still waiting after all these years, seemed to whisper a question I could no longer ignore. How much of myself had I erased in the name of love? It was a question I wasn't ready to answer yet. But soon, I would be forced to confront the truth not just in words, but in numbers, in papers, in betrayals far deeper than I ever expected. The morning after I overheard those words, I tried to move through the day as if nothing had changed. I folded laundry, poured cereal for the children, and smiled faintly at Emily's sharp instructions. But beneath the motions, my mind was restless, circling the same question. How had I become someone my own son wished away when I returned to my room? I opened the desk drawer where I kept old mail. At first, it was just busy work, a way to keep my hands from shaking. The first envelope I tore open nearly stole my breath. It was from the mortgage company 3 months overdue. My heart pounded as I stared at the paper. The house I had emptied my savings for, the house Jason had promised would always be partly mine, was dangling on the edge of default. I reached for my laptop, an object I rarely touched. The screen lit up with the cold blue of numbers, and there it was, the emergency fund account I had set up years ago. I thought it was untouched, a cushion for disasters, a reassurance that we were safe. But the balance staring back at me was almost nothing. Line by line, I scrolled through withdrawals, small ones, then larger ones. Week after week, month after month, thousands gone. At first I told myself it had to be mistakes, a bank error, something that could be explained, but the pattern was too clear. Quiet extractions, always just enough to go unnoticed, until over time the account had been bled dry. My chest ached as I realized what it meant. Jason and Emily had been dipping into it for years. What I believed was a shield for the family had become their private allowance. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. It wasn't just the overheard wish anymore. It was proof in ink and numbers. My sacrifices weren't gestures of love, they had been lifelines taken for granted. Then I heard voices from downstairs, rising and falling like waves against rocks. I stepped quietly to the stairwell. Jason's tone was tense, frustrated. He mentioned the account being empty. Emily's voice followed, light, almost casual. as she suggested another option, my small Christmas savings, the one I used each year to buy gifts for the grandchildren. My stomach turned. Even after everything I had given, they were plotting what else they could take. I pressed my hand to the wall to steady myself. The betrayal was no longer hidden in shadows. It was spoken aloud in their own home, carried on their own voices. I thought of all the nights I had given up sleep to soothe their children, all the times I had filled their cupboards, all the dreams I had postponed. The sorrow that had hollowed me out the night before began to shift. Something heavier, steadier, started to form inside me. A quiet anger, rising like water behind a dam. For the first time, I saw the truth without excuses. They had not simply failed to appreciate me. They had used me, drained me, and left me believing it was love. And I knew then that this was only the beginning. There was more beneath the surface, more I needed to uncover. The evidence was waiting, and I was ready to find it. I sat at my desk, staring at the laptop screen, my eyes moving down the list of withdrawals. At first, I thought it must have been a mistake, maybe a bill I forgot about, maybe a small charge that slipped through. But the pattern was too neat, too consistent. Week after week, month after month, money had trickled out of the emergency fund I once believed was untouchable. That account had been my safety net, the one thing I thought I could rely on if the unthinkable happened. I had built it slowly, sacrificing vacations, trimming back expenses, telling myself it was for the family, for broken cars, medical bills, sudden storms, real emergencies. Yet here I was, staring at numbers that told me a very different story. The account hadn't been protecting us. It had been feeding them. The shock hit first, like cold water poured down my back. Then came the grief, sharp and hollow. Every dollar I had put in felt like a promise, a piece of security I thought I was giving to my son and his family. And every withdrawal I saw now was a broken promise in return. I thought of all the times I had filled the pantry without being asked, the nights I had soothed crying children while their parents went out, the moments when I believed love was enough. I had convinced myself these acts were a choice, an extension of my heart. But looking at the drained account, I realized they hadn't just taken my help. They had taken advantage of me. Quietly, consistently, without remorse. Sadness began to shift into something heavier. A slow, simmering anger rose inside me. It wasn't the kind that screams or throws things. It was quieter, more dangerous, like a fire catching at the edges of dry wood. For the first time in years, I saw my sacrifices not as proof of love, but as evidence of how easily I had been used. I closed the laptop and sat in silence, my hands folded in my lap, the weight of truth pressing down on me. For so long, I had believed giving was the same as being loved. But this was not love. This was exploitation dressed up as family. And as much as it hurt, the realization also sharpened me. I was not powerless. Not yet. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a memory stirred documents I had once tucked away. Things Richard insisted we keep. Papers I hadn't touched in years. The betrayal of the account was devastating, but it was also a turning point. Because now I knew the truth. And with that truth, I would be ready for what I was about to uncover next. I pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk, the one I hadn't touched in years. Dust clung to the edges of old folders and envelopes, faint reminders of a life that once felt solid. My hands shook as I sifted through them, unsure of what I was even looking for, only that I couldn't stay powerless anymore. And then, there it was, a thick folder labeled in Richard's handwriting. My late husband had been meticulous, always insisting on copies, signatures, backup plans. At the time, I used to tease him for being too cautious. Now, as I spread those papers across the desk, I felt an unexpected surge of gratitude. The first document I unfolded was the co-ownership deed to this very house. My name was still there, printed clearly alongside Jason's. Richard had insisted we never give up our rights completely, no matter what promises Jason made. I ran my fingers over the ink, stunned. For all the years Jason had acted as though I was a guest in this house, I was in fact still an owner. 40% was mine. My heart pounded, not with fear this time, but with something sharper. Proof. Leverage. A reminder that I wasn't as powerless as they wanted me to believe. Then I found an envelope tucked neatly behind the papers, marked in Richard's bold letters, Plan B. My throat tightened as I opened it. Inside were account numbers, legal notes, and a short message written in his careful hand. He had written that I should never let anyone pressure me into signing away what was mine, and that family could be trusted with my heart, but never with my financial security. I read those words again and again, and for the first time in days, tears filled my eyes, not from despair, but from relief. Richard had seen what I could not. He had protected me, even from beyond the grave. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Sophia Miller, the lawyer who had guided our family for decades, answered with a familiar warmth. I explained the situation, my voice unsteady at first, but growing firmer as I laid out the betrayals, the overdue mortgage, the drained accounts. She listened carefully, then confirmed what the documents already told me: my co-ownership was still valid. Jason had never filed the papers to remove me, and I still legally owned 40% of the house. The weight that had been crushing my chest lifted just enough for me to breathe. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't invisible. I had power in my hands, written in black and white, and I had someone who would help me use it. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the small room that had felt like a prison cell. For years, I believed I was staying out of love, but now I saw I had been kept small by lies and silence. The papers on the desk told a different story, one where I was not helpless, one where I could choose, and for the first time in years, I felt steady. The betrayal had cut deep, but now I had something stronger than anger. I had a plan, and soon, Jason and Emily would see just how much I still had left. Christmas Eve arrived quietly, snow drifting against the windows, the house filled with the faint scent of cinnamon candles and pine. On the surface, it looked festive, but underneath, I could feel the cracks spreading. By mid-morning, Sophia had already sent the notice of intent to sell, and I knew it would land like a stone in still water, rippling chaos through Jason and Emily's carefully constructed world. Upstairs, I opened my suitcase, not frantically, not with panic, but with care. Each sweater folded felt like tucking away an old version of myself. I chose only the essentials: clothes, my passport, Richard's watch. Finally, I placed the envelope marked Plan B on top, a reminder that even after years of giving, I still had something that was mine. On the desk, I spread out brown paper and began wrapping 3 small gifts for my grandchildren. Each one held a letter I had written in the early morning hours. In those letters, I told them stories of pies we baked, of bedtime laughter, of moments that still filled me with light. I ended each one the same way: none of this is your fault. Remember that your grandmother loved you unconditionally. By noon, the first signs of chaos began. The lights flickered and went out. The television cut mid-commercial. The hum of the refrigerator fell silent. From downstairs, Jason cursed under his breath while Emily's voice grew shrill. Bills unpaid, guests expected, a holiday crumbling in their hands. I stayed in my room, calm in the growing storm. Their panic escalated with every hour. Cabinets slammed, phones rang. Jason barked into the receiver at the utility company, while Emily's heels clicked furiously across the floor. For years, I had been the one unraveling while they carried on. Now, the unraveling was theirs. In the evening, Emily stormed into my room without knocking. Her perfume was sharp, her eyes wild. She demanded answers: the mortgage, the power, why everything was collapsing at once. I met her gaze steadily and told her the truth: their life had been built on a foundation I paid for, and I was done paying. The words were quiet, calm, but final. She blinked at me, stunned, then turned on her heel and slammed the door. That night, I finished packing. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if each motion was a declaration that I was not afraid. Downstairs, their arguments rolled on, voices rising and falling, blaming each other. I no longer felt the need to explain, to fix, to absorb. For the first time, the chaos was not mine to carry. Before dawn, I dressed, lifted the suitcase from the closet, and carried it to the door. The house was cold and silent, shadows stretching across the walls. I knelt by the tree, its ornaments glinting faintly even without the lights, and placed the 3 plain gifts beneath its branches. No ribbons, no glitter, just paper and words of love sealed inside. At 4 a.m, the airport shuttle pulled into the driveway. I paused at the threshold, looking back one last time. The house stood dark, a hollow shell of promises never kept. Then I stepped into the crisp air, the snow crunching beneath my shoes, and felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. As the driver loaded my bag, I whispered to myself they wished me gone. And now I was, but not in the way they expected. I was walking toward something new, toward myself. And with each step into the breaking dawn, I knew there was no turning back. When the plane touched down in Paris, I felt the kind of stillness I hadn't known in years. The air was cold, crisp, and unfamiliar, yet it felt kinder than the air I had breathed in that house. For the first time in decades, there was no weight on my shoulders except the strap of my suitcase. In the days that followed, I found comfort in the smallest routines. I walked along narrow cobblestone streets with a cup of coffee warming my hands. I sat in cafes near the Seine, a notebook open in front of me, writing not just about what had happened, but about what I wanted for the years ahead. No interruptions, no clipped remarks, no door left ajar to remind me that I was unwanted. Just me, my thoughts, and the sound of life bustling around me. Back home, chaos unraveled. Jason and Emily received the notice and scrambled as the reality set in. I saw the proof in the messages that began flooding my phone. First came the angry calls, the desperate voicemails, the pleading texts. They begged for help, insisted it was all a misunderstanding, said they couldn't survive without me. Each notification lit up my screen, but I let them sit there unanswered. It wasn't until 2 days later that I finally picked up. Jason's voice cracked through the line, trembling, confused. He asked what I was doing, begged me not to go through with it. For a moment, I almost softened. Then I remembered his words from that night in the kitchen. I remembered the drained accounts, the lies, the silence that had followed me for years. And I told him the truth. I had done exactly what he once wished for. I had disappeared. The line went quiet, except for his breathing. I felt no need to argue, no need to explain. For once, silence was my ally. When I hung up, my hands trembled not from fear, but from release. Here in Paris, I have begun to understand something I should have known long ago. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's servitude. Family that treats you as a burden is not family, no matter what name they carry. For years, I believed being a good mother meant giving until there was nothing left. I thought if I kept filling the pantry, paying the bills, rocking the children to sleep, then surely love would circle back to me. But love that drains you, love that erases you, is not real love. Now, I walk toward myself instead of away. I write in my notebook. I sip tea in quiet cafes. I look at the world around me with fresh eyes. I miss my grandchildren. Yes, but I've left them something they can hold on to, proof that their grandmother loved them, and that real love never requires you to erase yourself. To anyone listening to my story, I want you to hear this clearly. You have the right to set boundaries. You have the right to keep your dignity. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not to stay, but to walk away. If my story has touched you, I invite you to share it. Like this video, leave a comment about where you're watching from, and pass it on to someone who may need to hear it. Stories of strength, survival, and quiet justice deserve to be heard, because sometimes the most powerful act of love is choosing yourself.